All right, what is up, YouTube? Welcome into another live show tonight, live from beautiful Kansas City, Missouri. Today, we got hoops, we got football, we got a lot to talk about. We have big channel news. I've got big channel news to start out with here. I probably, framing it like that maybe isn't totally fair, but I think you guys will really like it. It's something I've been teasing and talking about for a long time, and it finally is going to come to fruition hopefully tomorrow. So I will get you some info on that coming up. I am excited for today. I think we have some good topics to chew on. One of those being the fact that we have a story from CBS Sports that is detailing what new divisions could look like potentially in the new Big 12. And the report actually from CBS Sports was that the Big 12 is going to go to 7-team divisions, assuming that in 2023 you bring in everybody new and Oklahoma and Texas are still in the league, which obviously that's a whole different enchilada and a whole different thing to talk about. But right now the conversations in the league are proceeding as if they're going to be 7-team divisions because you will have a 14-team league. So lots of angles to talk about with that. I know everybody seems to be very fired up about divisions. That's not, I remember saying this back like in July, August, when all of this first came to fruition, the new look league. Divisions was just something I was not really that fired up about. I don't know. It doesn't get me as excited as seemingly everybody else, but I put up that post last night telling you guys about all this and mentioning the divisions, and man, like everybody just goes crazy with it. I know you guys love the divisions, so we can talk divisions in the Big 12 tonight, certainly, and I'll go through all the details that were laid out by Dennis Dodd in the story. I'll be honest, I don't like this one, and you guys know if you've been following this channel very long, you know how I feel about this particular story. But Gary Patterson, man, my guy Gary, he's gone to the dark side. He is rocking in Chris Del Conte's suite on Tuesday night for a basketball game between K-State and Texas. Guess who won that game in Austin, by the way? Not Texas, but looks like Gary Patterson is now officially listed in the Texas directory, like the school directory. So he's going to be working for Texas, which sucks. That sucks. We had a nice battle between Texas Tech fans and Jeff Goodman earlier this week, national basketball writer, as Texas Tech continues to make its climb up toward the top of the Big 12, and Chris Beard kind of plummets. And I'll be honest, I'm enjoying watching Texas Tech fans' reaction to that because they should be clowning all over Chris Beard as much as possible right now. That is what any God-fearing, red-blooded American would be doing in their position, right? You have to. You have to go crap on that guy after he left you high and dry and his lead assistant stayed and now is doing great things for your program. But I'm liking the fire that I'm seeing out of Texas Tech fans. I think the Chris Beard saga right now, the fact that Chris Beard is in this position where he is struggling speaks to the overall problems at Texas. And we're going to dive into that too, because I think that is a fascinating element of this whole deal to explore. Does Texas just have a culture problem that it just swallows up good coaches? Like I think and I think there are some things that have changed since the last time they had a lot of success with Rick Barnes and Mac Brown that speak to some of this. All right. So I've got that. Finally, Mike Gundy, I tell you what, Mike Gundy is making some moves. If he really is able to pull Derek Mason from Auburn to come be his defensive coordinator, that is a hell of a move to respond to losing Jim Knowles, who just left Oklahoma State as the defensive coordinator to go to Ohio State. So if you're an Oklahoma State fan, if you are, again, a fan of the Big 12, the new Big 12, I would suggest that is very good and positive news. Now, I do not see anything official as of yet, but the rumors are that is where things are headed, and we'll get into what exactly those are, where they're coming from. But like Brandon Marcello from 24/7 Sports, I was just reading a little blurb and update that he had. I've seen Bruce Feldman comment on it as well. I mean, it seems like there are legitimate legs to that fact that Derek Mason, obviously former SEC head coach, who's now been at Auburn as the defensive coordinator, could be headed to Stillwater as the DC. So that's what's on my outline today. Obviously, you guys can control some of the live show as well with your questions or comments in the chat. So get in there, make it lively, fill it up. Let's have some fun tonight. I will remind all of you, as I always do here to start these chats, please, first of all, if you are in here right now, if you could like the video, it really helps me out. Just takes one click, one little clicky click. That's all I'm asking out of you. And it'll help me out with the video, with the YouTube algorithm, get more views, and in turn get you better content in a roundabout way. Okay. Also, if you want to support what I'm doing here on the channel and ensure your question or comment cuts through the mess and gets up to the top of the chat, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Really appreciate all of you who do that. If you want to ensure that you are in on the conversation tonight, click that $ below where it says say something and get your question or comment up to the top for me. All right, let me take a peek here into the chat. What's up, everybody? See Wolf58 in there. I see Caleb. What's up, Caleb? I see S. Michael D. Hart, Go Mountaineers. Christian, a Wisconsin fan. What's up, Rob? Nathan K., not a fan of the divisions from CBS Sports. We'll talk about that. Man. Yeah, Wolf58, it is a bit of a surprise here. I tried to put out a message last night. I was going to do the live show last night, and I wound up I had all these errands to run after work, and it just got too late. So I was like, look, let me just reset, do this thing on Thursday. I'll have more time, my thoughts a little bit more put together, and thus here I am. And so far, it looked like this thing's filling up, man. People like the Thursday night chat, apparently. Maybe there's something to that. We'll see. But pull on up, have a seat. What's up, Boom to the Sooner? Boom to the Sooner, our resident and favorite Oklahoma fan in the chat tonight as well. I don't know if I really have much Oklahoma on the docket actually for once right now, but we'll see. We'll see if that changes. Matthew, John, what's up with the lack of K-State basketball fan support? It sounded pretty weak when they played Tech. Yeah, there's not a lot of excitement for K-State basketball right now. Yes, they have 2 nice wins back-to-back. And look, I'm rooting for them, but things, frankly, have gotten pretty stale with Bruce Weber. They've been a last-place team in the league, basically, for the last 2 years. Started out 0-4 this year, so there's not a ton of excitement generated there. Okay, let's see. Let me start with the news here. The news is that Stuart Mandel interview that I've been teasing for a long time, right? If you need a refresher, writer for The Athletic, again, a guy that I've always said this whole time, I have a lot of respect for because not only do I think he just generally is an accomplished guy and a smart guy, but he also is somebody that has come on the channel before. He's done interviews with me before in my past radio career. He's willing to do that. Not a lot of national guys are. It's not like I am some behemoth in the college sports media game, and he'll come on, and he agreed to come on with me to tape an interview tomorrow. Now, he also is somebody that has taken some strays here on this channel because he really sticks up for the Pac-12, being a guy who lives in Pac-12 country, and he also had that story at the beginning of all of this about the TV numbers that stayed up for a really long time, and it was frustrating that it painted a fairly inaccurate picture of the TV draw that the Irate 8 would actually be, which ironically now has been turned into 8 million people watching Baylor and Oklahoma State play for a Big 12 championship, right? So we have seen some of that debunked. We're going to get into that with him. I'm going to give him a chance to respond to that. Now, this is not going to be me just coming in guns a-blazing, this is not any gotcha interview, but I do want to talk to him and see, hey, do you think it was a little unfair? Do you think at this point the tone has changed and that this league is very viable? So I'm looking forward to that. He's a pretty good dude, and I have enjoyed chatting with him before, and I appreciate his willingness. I mean, he responded right away to my request, finally getting around to doing it here to talk to Stuart Mandel about that. So hopefully my hope is I get it recorded tomorrow afternoon, and then I get it to you probably on Saturday. We'll see, may splice it into a couple of different parts, but you should be getting that content here pretty soon, which I would imagine most people will be very interested in what it is that Stuart Mandel has to say. So here is the story from CBS Sports. With changes coming to the Big 12 in 2023, the league is already planning for the future with the goal of having 2 7-team divisions beginning next season. So that was really I will say, air quote here, bombshell of news. That was the main news item, that the Big 12 is planning on having 2 7-team divisions beginning next season. According to a report from CBS Sports, Dennis Dodd, Big 12 athletic directors, met last month in Las Vegas to begin deciding how the league would look for 3 seasons from 2003 to 2005 before Texas and Oklahoma depart for the SEC in July of 2025. So, yeah, honestly, I think the way that it's phrased there, the league is already planning on having 2 7-team divisions beginning next season. I actually think the correct phrasing would be the year after next season. But I think most people understand the general gist and idea here. More from the article, the Big 12 is operating under the assumption that both the Longhorns and Sooners will stay in the league 4 more years. The current Big 12 TV contract with ESPN ends in 2025. If not, both schools are subject to 9-figure early exit fees for breaking the grant of rights. So, I guess that's another part of this too. Like the Big 12 feels, I get convicted enough at this point in time that they're going to need to plan for having a 14-team league with Texas and Oklahoma around, with the caveat here that, like, of course you operate like that until told otherwise. And still, there's been like no break in that dam at all. Texas and Oklahoma so tight-lipped about what is happening there, whether or not there is going to be a change and they're going to leave earlier. I still have always thought 2023 made the most sense for the timing to work out on that, but they'd have to get on it pretty quick because this is not like a snap your fingers and make it happen sort of a thing. Like, it's going to take some time and some wind up and build up here. So we're getting close. Like, we're inching closer to this maybe being a reality that Cincinnati and Houston and BYU and UCF are going to get their shot at Texas and Oklahoma for at least a year or two. So, if you're somebody that really wants to see that, which I'd imagine those 4 fan bases really want to see that, this would be a positive step that you're finding out that the league is at least planning for this right now and moving in that direction. Now, as far as the divisions go, I know that is like the juicy part. Like, I'm more interested in the psychology behind this. How does that work with the divisions? Like, what are the games that are going to have to be played there? How does this work for Texas and Oklahoma? There was a little blurb later on in the article with somebody taking a bit of a shot at Texas and OU and making a joke, a source that was cited here in the story, making a joke about Texas and Oklahoma, the divisions and all that. I am much more interested in that than the breakdown of the actual divisions, but I get it. It's driving the conversation here. I know you guys really like it. And boom to the Sooner. I see the first person in with a donation tonight. Always appreciate you. Boom to the Sooner. Thank you, my friend. He says, how about this Big 12 division? K-State, KU, UCF, Cincinnati, BYU, Iowa State, West Virginia. So that seems to be more like, what are we doing with that one? Like an East, like I guess an East, North. Would that be like North? I guess North, right? Because BYU's in there. And that's a part of this. Like, how do you decide to break down the divisions in the first place? You going East-West, you going North-South, you going Legends leaders. Like, who cares? We'll just throw them together, however it is we want to throw them together. That's what you have to decide first before you then go into, like, how is all of this going to work? It's also, if you're trying to do it with competitive balance in mind, I also find that element of it very fascinating because you're going to be doing this for a short period of time, right? Maximum, it's 3 years here. So you'd have to be doing it based on what you think the competitive balance would shake out to be right now. Or you're just going long-term and thinking, well, forget Texas and Oklahoma. We're just going to go long-term and only be concerned with what it is that the rest of the league is going to be competitive balance-wise, and we'll figure out the rest later. So, boom to the Sooner on the surface. Like, I don't really have a huge issue with that. When I look at it and I see K-State there, I'm thinking, like, all right, how am I going to feel about this as a K-State fan with this division, and what is it going to so you've got, UCF, Cincy, BYU, Iowa State, West Virginia. That is a fairly solid, that's a pretty salty league, pretty salty division there in football, but you are missing out on Texas and Oklahoma. Interesting. It's interesting. CG Shields. I appreciate the donation. CG Shields. I do not see any question or comment attached to that, so I very much appreciate the generosity with the donation there. If you do have something else to add and I'm just missing it, make sure and pop on in there and get that in because I did not see anything. If you want to be like those guys and get your question or comment up to the top of the chat, you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something and do that and also support what I'm doing here on the channel. Also, everybody that's in here now, we got about double the people here. If you could like the video, if you're in, like the video, click the like button. It helps me out if you could do that. Continuing on here. Now, there was something I was going to mention. A source that's being quoted here in the story said a decision has not been made whether to separate the divisions competitively or geographically. Big 12 North and South divisions existed. Okay, yada, yada, yada. So that's it right there. They don't know yet whether or not they're going to do this competitively or geographically. So that is something that needs to be decided here. It seems like I'm looking at Wolf 58, got to be geography, I would think, cuts down on travel expenses. Probably. But if you are, I will just say this, Wolf 58, to that thought and to that end. This is a league where I think you're going to have to think more creatively and more long-term as opposed to short-term with like the expenses on things like that. And I know that there are a lot of expenses, and it's obviously you'll always have the travel expense as long as the league goes on. But if spacing out the leagues differently makes a big difference in terms of like some kind of competitive edge you can get, if you think it's going to create more entertaining games, a more entertaining product, that may net you more money in the future if you take a short-term TV deal and then the next one's more lucrative and better. You really want to do it for the health of the league, and you have to be thinking about like there are going to be some haircuts in the short term when this deal is up. You're probably going to make less money, at least for a little while. Like there are going to be some haircuts to take, but you have to be thinking like long-term, what is best for the viability of the league? What is going to be best competition-wise for the league, and to turn it into, I mean, basically I say competition-wise, really what it is what will turn this league into the best TV product? What divisions will put this league in the best position to be a great TV product? That I think is what you really have to be thinking about and focusing on. There was a blurb in here, about Texas and Oklahoma. So the other goal, according to sources, again from the CBS Sports story, would be to split Oklahoma and Texas in different divisions so it would not disrupt the future divisions after the two schools leave. CBS Sports adds that one working member joked that Texas and Oklahoma should be placed in the same division to make sure they can't play each other in the Big 12 championship game. Well, that's not the worst idea in the world. And at this point, like, who cares? I mean, you can call it petty or whatever it is that you want. But again, if we're talking about viability of the league, long-term for the league here, who cares if you're throwing a little bleepy to Texas and Oklahoma? If it works out for the rest of the league, the betterment of it long-term, and those are going to be better divisions, then do it. But I do think that makes it tougher, right? If you have one on each side, then they can just depart here in a couple, whenever it's going to be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And then you still have your divisions intact, and you don't want to go through a whole like retooling, like moving people around after they leave. I very much understand the desire to not want to do that, because the other thing that you have to keep in mind is you want to develop some new rivalries here. So if you have these 4 new teams coming into the conference, you want them to develop natural rivalries with everybody. And the only way that happens is to like have them playing the same teams over and over again, have those games happen. So you don't want to start something for a couple of years. If you have Cincinnati and West Virginia geared up in a really nice series, and then you got to split them up and they're not going to play necessarily every single year, that's something to be avoided too. And I'm sure these are all scenarios that are being talked about behind closed doors or are going to be talked about. And I enjoy, I know Texas and Oklahoma fans that do come by the channel here every once in a while will probably say like some of this is a little bit petty, and sure it is. There are raw feelings, there are hurt feelings, and you're going to have to deal with some of that when a major decision like that is made. But I just love, like, it's not just me. I mean, like, it is every one of these stories that you see about the Big 12, whether it's from The Athletic or CBS Sports or what, you pretty much always hear about like some little joke or some jab thrown at Texas or Oklahoma from these people. And like, even I've just heard personal anecdotes of people that have been around some high-ranking officials in the Big 12 that have done the same thing too throughout the year. So it is not just me. It is not just me. I am a mere representative of how most in Big 12 country feel about Texas and Oklahoma. That is another thing to pull from this story. I would just add that is a little minor aside here in the story and not really the general point of it. But it does, I think, showcase that attitude that is still there. So not just me. Don't just blame me. It's all of us. We all feel this way. It's the same way Oklahoma fans, you guys all feel about Lincoln Riley, and you're not going to listen to anybody tell you otherwise, and you're going to take the cheap shots and call him Tebow and all of that. Little bit more from the story here. The Big 12 plans for its working group to forward a proposed division structure to Big 12 ADs by March during the Big 12 tournament. The lineup could be finalized by Big 12 spring meetings, which will be held in May in Scottsdale, Arizona. A source within the league said the Big 12 is most likely going to stick with its current 9-game conference schedule. That's an easy one. That's a very easy one. The 9-game conference schedule makes all the sense in the world because it is going to get more difficult to continue to find like good non-conference games. If we're going to have if there's really going to be a scheduling alliance between the alliance, it will be tougher to find like Power 5 non-conference games. So you don't want to be moving down to an 8-game conference schedule and having to add another one that's going to do nothing for your strength of schedule competitively. I see CG Shields. You did have a question. Thank you to whoever alerted me to that in the chat. CG Shields. Sorry, did have a question. After leaving West Virginia on an island for 10 years, would the league really bring in Cincy, then split them up, as the CBS story suggested? If so, come on, league. Yeah, now here's what I would say for that, CG. If you are a West Virginia fan, if you are West Virginia, like, you'd have every right to be pretty upset about that. You have every right now to be in these rooms, like, fighting for that to happen. Give us more natural travel partners. Give us more natural rivalries that exist there. Like, Cincy and West Virginia seems like that could be a pretty fun regional rivalry that exists or that develops. In basketball, I mean, that script writes itself, with Huggins being a guy who spent as much time as he did at Cincinnati. But even football-wise, like, I can absolutely see how that would develop and be fun. And then, yes, the travel costs, like, West Virginia's travel budget has been very, very high throughout the time that they've been in the Big 12. And, like, that's a tough thing to absorb. That's a tough thing to deal with. So I totally get it. I would also, though, come back to CG, my original point here, which is that you do have to, again, be thinking bigger picture here and more long-term. So if you are, like, the case that I would make, if it really, and I'm not saying that this is the way to go. I'm not saying that the way to go is to split Cincinnati and West Virginia, because you guys, I said it from the jump here tonight. I don't have, like, a real strong feeling where I'm like, this needs to be the divisions. Like, maybe at some point I'll really sit down and look at it, but I just don't. They'll figure it out. That's kind of how I view it. But if you think, like, you're convicted, this is what we need to do, and it includes Cincy in one division, West Virginia in the other division, I would sit West Virginia down and just be like, look, I mean, here's the deal. We're trying to play this long term. So if you want a Power 5 home long term, this will be better in the end because of X, Y, and Z. And yes, I know that it's going to cost you an extra $1.5 million per year right now to travel all of your non-revenue sports, and you don't lose that. Like, whatever the scenario actually is, right? You sit down and explain that. Now, what the Big 12 has to worry about then is, does that, like, increase West Virginia's desire to leave? Does that increase West Virginia making overtures to the ACC? I mean, it might, but it seems like West Virginia is already really in that boat anyway. So, like, I don't think you're risking that much, because if West Virginia is getting an invite to the ACC, they're leaving whether or not Cincinnati and them are split up or not, right? So there are a lot of dynamics here, and still a lot of people looking out for their best interest. And I just think it's more complicated than it could appear on the surface in splitting up the divisions and looking at what it is that you're doing. Because to me, again, the end goal has to be, like, best TV product, whatever it is that's going to make this league the most entertaining long-term and get you as much TV money as possible. But it's a great question. It's a great question. And if you are a West Virginia fan, like, I totally understand and totally get why you would feel like, hey, if you're adding someone up in our neck of the woods, you better have us in the same division and playing as much as possible. Completely get it. Daniel, I see Daniel in here. Thank you for the donation, Daniel. Daniel, from a Cyclone, I don't like recreating the Texas problem by keeping all the Texas schools in one division. Why should they have easier travel? I guess if the purpose is merely for them to have easier travel, again, like, I can understand frustration there if you are a West Virginia and you're saying, like, us and Cincinnati have to get split up, but the Texas schools are staying together. The more I talk this out, I guess the way that I'm being led here is to lean away from geography, unless the geography works out for the betterment of competitive balance. I would do it all about what I think makes the league the most competitive, creates the most compelling matchups on a regular basis. That's what I would do. I would not do it necessarily based on geography. So I wouldn't be throwing the Texas schools a bone just for the sake of geography. I would say, like, this is really what does it for the conference, is to have these schools playing every single year. But I kind of doubt that that's the way that it would actually work out. So I guess, long story short, Daniel, like, I tend to agree with you on that. I would not be doing it just for the sake of doing it. I would not be doing it just for the sake of allowing these Texas schools to be together. I think there are bigger things to be thinking about right now than just simply geography. The landscape is different than when we had Big 12 North-South. And thank you once again, Daniel. I appreciate it, man. If we're thinking once again North-South, and back in 1996, when the genesis of the Big 12 actually formed, like, at that point, you were in much more of a power position. There just weren't the same dynamics at play to be thinking about that there are right now, or at least the stakes are not as high. Maybe the dynamics were similar at the time, but the stakes were not as high. You could get away with more of the geography. you see what I'm saying. Right now, like the stakes are very high, and you still need to be doing everything that you can to make the league as competitively viable as possible. But it's a good thought. It's a good thought for sure. And I'm not here. Believe me, I am not here to just cater to the Texas schools or anything like that. But I would also say I don't think you have to worry, no matter how it is you split up the divisions. I don't think you have to worry about any school becoming Texas or like Texas Light. Like nobody is going to wield that level of power. And frankly, a lot of it is basically just because like right now, nobody has another offer. Kind of all stuck with each other, whether you like it or not. Nobody has another offer. So there's not going to be a Texas that has that kind of leverage over the rest of the league, even if they do get kind of paired together. I don't think that concern really should exist. So I think we'll be okay on that front. Boom to the Sooner. Appreciate you, Boom to the Sooner. Another donation here. Boom to the Sooner says, once OU leaves for the SEC, shouldn't the Big 12 have its title game at Gaylord Stadium in Norman, Oklahoma, so that I can attend? I don't know if you want to invite a bunch of Big 12 fans every single year into that venue, right? With Oklahoma gone and how tense things already are, you're just going to have a bunch of people trashing the place. You'll just have people trashing the place, Boom to the Sooner. I would just say be careful what you wish for on that front, man. Be careful what you wish for. Now, if what you're going for there is like, hey, they should just have it in Norman every year because that's basically been the Oklahoma Memorial Trophy every single year, fair enough. Obviously, that didn't happen this year, as I'm sure you don't need me to remind you, but fair enough with how much Oklahoma won the league. I can definitely understand Oklahoma fans pitching for that for the joke of it. But listen, you're not going to you don't want any part of Baylor and Oklahoma State fans, for instance, and nothing against those specific fans. It's just, Baylor and Oklahoma State fans will be fired up playing in there. They'll be busting things down, breaking seats. You don't want any of that. Bud, I appreciate their donation, Bud. Thank you. Very generous donation there from Bud. Bud, do the Pokes want to continue Bedlam during the transition period and afterward? Well, it sounds like now Oklahoma State fans that are in here, maybe you can. I'm sorry. I'm reacting to the chat here. Alan, John is an advocate of splitting up KU and K-State. I mean, I'm not. I'm an advocate of doing what's best for the league. If that means that KU and K-State get split up, so be it. I would rather have K-State in a Power 5 league 15 years from now than not, but say, hey, the last 7 years we got to play KU every year because we were in the same division. You understand the point there. But do the Pokes want to continue Bedlam during the transition period afterward? Yeah, Oklahoma State fans, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like Oklahoma State has the desire, but it was actually Mike Gundy at one point in time that came out and said, like, based on what he had been hearing from the higher-ups at Oklahoma State, it didn't sound like that was going to be a reality and that they were just kind of bracing for that and preparing for that. So I think Oklahoma State has no problem with it and definitely would want to and certainly wants to play, to get a shot at them. But I don't think it's going to happen right away. I think that's going to be one where it will just take Oklahoma getting away and maybe missing it. And maybe I don't know. I mean, it's honestly, I'm not well-versed probably in the rivalry enough or like deep-seated into what the feelings are on both sides right now to know, like, would that really happen to Oklahoma? Would Oklahoma 10 years on down the road right now miss that? Would it be like, hey, we're getting beat up in the SEC, we're like an 8 or 9 win program. It's not quite as fun. We want to bring our old rival back that we beat almost every single year. Now, again, I know Oklahoma State fans, you got bragging rights right now. Congratulations for that. But in general, that has not been a game that's gone well. So like maybe over the course of 5-10 years, kind of like Kansas and Missouri. I mean, eventually they wore down and then played the last couple of years in basketball. Maybe you get to a point where you say, we kind of liked having that old rival to beat up on, and now we're not quite as hot as we were when we're in the SEC with Brent Venables and not Lincoln Riley. So I think there's a chance that could happen, but I don't think you're probably going to have to go through like a period where it's going to be a game that does not occur, which sucks. I mean, like that sucks for everybody involved, and that's unfortunately just a reality of conference realignment. But we're just, the toothpaste is like out of the tube on that. It's super, super lame. But the toothpaste is out of the tube on that. Like, I think JJ, I see JJ in the chat says, think A&M in Texas. That's what happens with OU and OSU. I think there's probably some truth to that. And A&M and Texas have been like too petty to really get it back together yet. But eventually, I mean, obviously with the SEC thing now, like they're going to have to play each other. So that kind of worked out. I don't know if it's going to end up like that with Oklahoma State joining the same conference at a certain point in time. But like, I think you could have feelings develop similarly and kind of a standoff thing going on there. And then hopefully eventually down the road, something will nudge somebody to move, because college football is better with that game happening. College football is better with A&M and Texas happening. College sports, but even college football is better with Kansas and Missouri happening and playing. But we've just, through conference realignment, we've just blown through all this. Like, we've proven that tradition in these games and rivalries, like, it just, that can't be the priority anymore, because that's not what's driving it. And there's so much on the line and so much at stake. And that's kind of, I go back to the comment about KU and K-State, where I say, like, hey, if they do get split up, whatever's best for the league and whatever's best for the product of the league, so be it. Because, like, rivalries have been split up. It just is what happens now, and you're fighting for survival. It's like, it's kind of like the hierarchy of needs, right? If you're thinking about the hierarchy of needs, it's like, what, like the bottom is like, you know, food, water, all that stuff. Like, you're hungry, you're thirsty, like you need to breathe, things that'll keep you alive. And then up at the top, it's like, you know, meaning, purpose, all that stuff. Like, the rivalry, being able to play your rival every year is like higher up on that hierarchy of needs than like surviving in a power conference. So, like, that has to be the first thing. And then you can start to stack up and like get to the rivalry part. So that's kind of where I'm at on all of that. Colby, appreciate the donation, Colby. You guys have been great tonight. If you want to donate like Colby and everybody that has been doing so, you click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Colby, do you think it would be good to move conference championships to new locations every few years for new experiences, or keep it where it's at for now? Oh, well, that's an interesting thought. I'm open to, moving the conference championship game around a little bit. That will be something, you know, I mean, does the league change at all where its offices are, where it's headquartered when things switch over here? You obviously still have a big Texas presence, even though you don't have Texas at Austin. So I would imagine things probably stay in Dallas, and Dallas it's a cool place to have it. Like, I can't hate on Jerry World. I can hate on the team that plays regularly in Jerry World. I mean, my God, Cowboys. But I like Jerry World, but I wouldn't be opposed to bringing a game back to Arrowhead Stadium, for instance, giving it a shot there. I think a part of the thing here, you know, like I see JJ move it to Houston. I don't know. You have to make sure that it's going to be a place where you will still draw fans. I think you want that, because like Baylor and Oklahoma State seemed like a really cool atmosphere where teams still showed up. And I think that's where like Dallas came in pretty clutch there, being a pretty central location for both Baylor and Oklahoma State. So you got to keep those things in mind. And that's probably a part of the issue. If you're going to go back to like Arrowhead, would be the fact that would be further away for a lot of your Southern schools. And now, I mean, it's just going to be harder now with the teams that are coming in to make it all real geographically viable. But I would be open to it. Certainly, like me, my personal preference, just as a fan, somebody watching, I would be totally open to watching the game in new stadiums. But maybe that's just me being kind of nerdy about it, thinking it's cool to have it in different places. Because like I can remember like NCAA football, all you guys, I hope there's a lot of you in here who played a lot of NCAA football growing up. Like I would always move those games around to different stadiums. When you could go through and make your schedule, I would put games in whatever neutral site that I could in the non-con, like just to switch it up. I think that's cool. I think it's fun. But is it in the end going to be the best thing for the league? I don't know. I'd be curious to get like a deeper dive into like the numbers, the financials on how things have worked out in Dallas and what that's been like for the conference. Nathan says, have it in Vietnam so I can make a quick flight and see the conference championship game. Yeah, I laugh at that because there's two reasons. One, I think back to like K-State. I think Texas Tech played in one. There was like, they did that like Coca-Cola Bowl thing in Tokyo for a while. Maybe it was Oklahoma State that played in it once or twice. Anyway, like, so that was just such a crazy thing to have like a Big 12 football game in the Tokyo Dome. It has happened before. Can you go back to doing that again? That'd be really funny. Also, I laugh because my guys on the Solid Verbal, a great college football podcast, they would always joke about that. Like some really small matchup. Like who was it? Like did UConn play like UMass or something earlier this year? And it was two terrible football teams. And they're like joking about that game being in the Tokyo Dome. Anyway, maybe chuckle. So I appreciate that there. You guys can keep donating by clicking the $ below the chat box. I see that Steven has done that. Thank you very much, my man, Steven. Steven, what is the more plausible scenario, the Big 12 getting Arizona and Arizona State or Boise State and Memphis? Well, unfortunately, I think the more plausible scenario is Boise State and Memphis. And I realize as I say that, like, I don't mean that to sting if you're a Boise State or a Memphis fan. I think you guys can understand that, though, that it's not even, that's not really a comparison about the schools and like what would be better football wise, which is what drives everything. Like there's a legitimate conversation to be had about like if you add Boise State and Memphis, does that make your conference better at football than Arizona and Arizona State? Legitimate argument that you're going to be better off. Like you're going to have a stronger football conference with Boise and Memphis there than Arizona and Arizona State right now. Both programs seem to be kind of a mess. Arizona maybe getting things turned around, but they've been generally a mess with what's going on off the field and on the field here recently, and they're not exactly perennial powers. So I get why the question would be asked. The thing I would just say, if you got Arizona and Arizona State, it's just such a psychological blow to the Pac-12. Like if now the Pac-12 is actually losing schools to this league that was supposed to be worse off and worse TV ratings and not making as much money, it's just that's a power move, man. That's a boss move if you can go get it done. So that would be why I would still say you'd rather do the Arizona and Arizona State thing. The other part is because then if you wanted to come back around and add Boise and Memphis after that, you still could. In all likelihood, they're still going to be there. So I think, though, the more plausible would be eventually the Big 12 just says, well, screw it. We'll just go grab whoever else we can to make the league as strong as possible and go all in on, whatever. We're going to play on weekdays, weeknights. We'll play whenever. We're going to be the conference for gamblers. We're going to be fun and span the globe and go Memphis, Arizona, or Memphis, Boise State, etc. I saw Heartland College Sports and included San Diego State again. Shout out to my guys, Joel. I forget the guy's name, who's always DMs me San Diego State stuff all the time, which I appreciate the zeal from him on that front. But, maybe you go that route too. But, yeah, I would say that is more likely, even though I would prefer Arizona and Arizona State just for the psychological blow to the Pac-12. But I agree with Wolf 58. That's probably just one of those things. And that's been like a message board rumor going back to the 2010, 2011 cycle of conference realignment that might be possible. I mean, I legitimately can remember listening to people on the radio I was interning at Sports Radio 810 in Kansas City during the first round of realignment. I just remember listening to guys coming on and speculating about that all the time back in like 2010. So it just feels to me like one of those things that probably won't happen. There seem to be some issues there with Arizona and Arizona State in the Pac-12. Like they're not perfectly in sync. And that's why you keep having this come up every once in a while. But I don't think we would ever get like across the finish line there, unfortunately. But I appreciate the question. It is a good question and good topic. Okay. Keep the donations coming in. $sign below the chat box there if you want to get your question or comment up to the top of the chat. I will certainly supersede my outline for that if you guys still have questions or comments here throughout the show. But I am going to move down the outline a little bit here. I should do. We've been talking about these divisions the whole time, and I didn't even give you what the proposed divisions were here from CBS Sports. Here is how CBS Sports proposed these things be split up. Big 12 North, Cincy, BYU, Iowa State, KU, K-State, and the two Oklahomas, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. So you got Oklahoma, Kansas, Iowa State, the states, obviously, the state of Oklahoma, the state of Kansas, Iowa State, and then BYU and Cincinnati. That would be the North. And the South, Baylor, Houston, TCU, Texas, Texas Tech, UCF, West Virginia. So that is the scenario where West Virginia and Cincy get split up. All the Texas schools are together, Baylor, Houston, TCU, Texas, Texas Tech. So they do come out winners in the short term financially in terms of travel and all of that. And then UCF and West Virginia. I mean, at least there you got someone out on the same time zone, West Virginia. Is that maybe a consolation there with UCF? It's all right. But I get why people would be upset. I get West Virginia in that scenario would have every right to be very upset about the fact that they're losing their potential closest travel partner that's coming in, and the Texas schools all get to stay together. I don't think, as it was insinuated earlier, that would be some kind of concession like these Texas schools have all the power and that's what's happening. I don't think that would really be what's driving that and what the issue would be. I think it would be more like if you just decide that that's what's going to make sense. But, I have to think through this pretty fast, like competitive balance here. I mean, Cincy, BYU, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and then thinking about in the future, like Oklahoma dropping off, like that's still, that's a pretty salty division. The other one, Baylor, Houston, TCU, Tech, UCF, West Virginia. I mean, those feel pretty equitable, especially when you take Oklahoma and Texas out. Those feel pretty equitable to me in terms of what you're doing from a competitive balance standpoint. I don't think it's terrible, but I understand why a lot of people would be very upset with it, and I'm certainly not going to rubber stamp that as like the best way to go about doing it. Daniel, I see the donation in there. Daniel, the only comment I see says $10. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the donation, but if you have anything else to add, make sure and get it there in the chat. I'll try and check it and get back to you on that. Oh, there we go. Daniel, I see. Just wanted to thank you so much for your podcast to help me get through conference realignment this summer. Thank you, Daniel. You're the man, my dude. I appreciate you saying that, not just for donating, but also for the kind words there. If you are new in the chat here, please do like the video if you have not. Ratio there. I see a lot of people in the chat that have not liked it. One click does help me out. I would appreciate that. Okay. Let me talk real quick about Mike Gundy. So Derek Mason apparently is going to be the next defensive coordinator, or at least strongly linked right now to Stillwater and being the next defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. This is from Bruce Feldman. Apparently Bruce Feldman said this on Next Round Live, which is a daily show, midday show. Said, quote, "My understanding is Derek Mason was in Stillwater yesterday." And then he said, quote, "I don't think he and Brian Harsin are on the same page." So Harsin, obviously the head coach there at Auburn. Here's a quote from a 24/7 Sports article. It says, "Derek Mason, Auburn's defensive coordinator last season, is poised to be named defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State." Poised to be named defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. That's not a yes, he's going to be the guy, but that seems like there's an awful lot of smoke there right now for Derek Mason being the next guy at OSU. And man, I just have to say it, like Gundy, that's an impressive one to me. And that's like, you kind of think, it felt to me, and I think Oklahoma State fans, you could probably speak to this too. Like it felt to me like Gundy and OSU had grown a little bit stale, like maybe just a little tired of each other there for a while. He was seemingly pursuing other jobs. Oklahoma State was kind of stuck in that like 7 to 8 win range there for a moment. And now all of a sudden, like Gundy's back in the Big 12 championship game. They're within an eyelash, like 6 inches of the playoff. He loses his big-time defensive coordinator, but now he goes out and grabs another one that's an impressive name that's been an SEC head coach before, that's a current standing SEC defensive coordinator. I think if you ask most people across the country who is what is the better program, what is the more prestigious program, they're going to say Auburn as opposed to Oklahoma State. So if you're taking that guy, like that says something about you, who you are, the reputation of the program, and where seemingly things are going there. Because that's like a Derek Mason kind of jumping ship sort of move to me. Like he needs to get out, he needs to find a decent landing space, and here it is in Stillwater. So yes, I think a lot of that is about like Auburn and Harsin, and bigger part of the story here can be like, what does that do to you if you're an Auburn fan? Boy, Brian Harsin's going to find himself fired pretty quickly based on the way things have been going there. You don't love to see that, but at the same time, it also says something. It speaks to where Oklahoma State's at to be able to go pluck a guy like that. And at this stage in his career, like Gundy, a guy who it seemed like things were kind of heading downhill for a while there. It just seems like there's such a revitalization right now of Gundy and Oklahoma State, and it all kind of started in a year where the expectations were not sky high for them this season. But now they've gone through and done what they've done on the field, and now it looks like they're going to be making a big move off the field by taking Derek Mason here. So, like, hey, man, I've got nothing to do but just tip my cap to Mike Gundy. I mean, as a K-State fan, I'm like, well, crap, I don't really want to see that. I would love to see them fall off in a year where I think K-State can be pretty competitive next season. But for the sake of the league, like that's great. And for the sake of Oklahoma State's program, that's great. And I would very much love to see that. Like, keep it rolling. Keep that Oklahoma State defense rolling. It also accentuates the fact that, like, again, there is some defense being played in this conference. Like 10 years ago, would a sitting SEC defensive coordinator be lining up to take a lateral move to the Big 12 where supposedly there's no defense and it's just all offense, willy-nilly crazy? Probably not. The narrative on that has changed, and people who actually pay attention realize that. Maybe not every fan out there realizes it, but people that pay attention realize it. All right, a couple of donations to get to here. Appreciate you guys. Boom to the Sooner hopping in. Once again, boom to the Sooner. Should BYU and TCU be in the same division, seeing that they were rivals in the Mountain West? I think that's the type of thing that should be thought about. Like how can we develop these rivalries? And if we're going to talk about like Cincy and West Virginia, again, that's another part of it. Maybe that's the best thing competitively for the league is to get as many teams together there where you can form some of those new and cool rivalries as much as possible. I think it matters. I think it's something that can be considered. I don't think BYU and TCU are like strong enough in and of themselves to say like we need to do that and prioritize that above something else. So there could be something that knocks it out. But that's a cool and intriguing thing to think about. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of routes to go here, man. I mean, I saw people making the jokes early on about, hey, BYU and Baylor doing like a different version of the Holy War there between those two. Cincy and West Virginia can be fun. I just tend to think like UCF is going to develop a heated rivalry with somebody. There's too much juice. There's too much excitement from the fan base. There's just too much zest coming out of Central Florida. And I know I'm not calling you Central Florida. I'm saying geographically from Central Florida about the UCF Knights that like they're gonna hit it off with somebody there. They absolutely will. I have no doubt about that. Who it is, I haven't totally decided that yet. So we'll have to see. But those are the fun parts of this is thinking about the new rivalries that can develop. Will, appreciate the donation, Will. Very generous of you. Thank you, man. Will says, let's be honest, West Virginia is a placeholder school waiting to join the ACC when Notre Dame finally joins in football to get to 16. That's part of the Big 12. Is part of why the Big 12 is still looking to add. Well, the problem with that, and I'm not saying that that's totally off base because I think West Virginia clearly would prefer to be in the ACC for a myriad of reasons. They've had their sights set on it for a long time. Geographically, it makes more sense. Well, the ACC does have a whole set of problems. It's a more secure league than the Big 12 right now. So, like, of course they would want to be there. I think there are two issues, though. One is, like, just how wanted are they by the ACC in general? This has been a flirtation for a long time. This has been, the ACC has had plenty of opportunities to go grab West Virginia and do it. They have not. I would think if it were something that they really wanted, they would do that pretty quickly. Now, you bring up the Notre Dame scenario. The problem there for West Virginia is I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think Notre Dame is ever joining the ACC full time. I think that's been a part of the stammering around by Jim Phillips and the ACC on playoff expansion. They have wanted to try and force Notre Dame's hand. That's why, like, the 18 playoff was in there for a while. Like, you can conceivably say, if this is going to be an 18 playoff, Notre Dame, you're probably going to have to join a league. There's going to be a way easier path as a conference champion. If we're doing an 18 playoff and automatic bids for conference champions, there's less at-large out there available. You need to join a league. I don't think anyone's ever strong-arming Notre Dame into anything. They've gone so long without being in a league, doing their own thing. They just don't get pushed around in that way, and they don't really compromise much. I mean, that even goes to, like, academics and trying to get guys in. They've done a little bit of that, but not much. Like, Notre Dame's going to stay pretty principled. So I just find it very unlikely that they are going to ever join a conference. There would have to be something, some carrot out there specifically for them where they say, like, we are going out and doing this just for us. This is going to be an us thing. This is not because we feel some partnership to you. We feel some, like, debt of gratitude to you or whatever. It's going to be like, no, we're doing this because something came up and now this is by far the best move for us. I don't really see it happening. So I think that's the dilemma. I don't think West Virginia is particularly thrilled with the Big 12, but I think it beats being out on the cold. I think it beats being in the AAC. And I think the ACC still remains a long shot there. And I'm not really saying that's right or wrong, but I think that is the reality of where West Virginia is at right now. But I appreciate the thought. I appreciate the donation and appreciate you being here on the channel, man. Sorry, I just ate before I hopped on here, so that's why I'm, like, burping all over the place tonight. Not the most flattering thing in the world. Gary Patterson, dude. I don't know if you guys saw. If you follow me on Twitter, at JL Kurtz, you can see it. But Gary Patterson was at the K-State Texas basketball game on Tuesday, which, again, I will remind you, K-State won. But Gary Patterson was sitting up with Chris Del Conte, who was the current Texas AD. He obviously used to be the TCU AD, so that used to be Gary Patterson's boss. And not only was Gary Patterson up there in Texas gear, he had, like, I think it was like a kind of mock turtleneck thing going on there. I forget what it was, but it had a Texas logo, like it's officially licensed Texas gear. And then someone followed that up by looking in the actual, like, Texas faculty directory. Gary Patterson was listed with the same position that Texas had made publicly open, which was special assistant to the head coach. So it looks like Gary Patterson's going to be the special assistant to the head coach for Steve Sarkisian in Austin. And it sucks. That just sucks, man. I don't know how much of an impact that will actually have, but it certainly can't hurt. I mean, I think Gary Patterson knows a lot of football. He obviously knows a lot about the league. He's coached in the league for 10 years. That guy's won a lot of games. As rough as it got at the end there, where it clearly seemed like things were on the outs, like TCU and Gary Patterson needed a split, doesn't mean that the guy still doesn't have a lot to offer potentially there to Texas. And the other thing about it is, like, Gary Patterson is like blue-collar, no-nonsense guy that knows how to coach defense and toughness. And what has Texas lacked? It is certainly not talent. It is certainly not resources. It is culture, toughness, and defense. Like, Texas has just not been consistent with any of that at all. And I think they have such massive cultural problems that, like, Gary Patterson can be pretty useful there. And, you know, when you're just taking on a position like special assistant to the head coach, it's like that's one of these, you know, analyst sort of roles that we're seeing pop up everywhere. And the Alabamas of the world can just take former NFL head coaches and roll them through there and just have them sit and hang out and analyze and do a little bit of work. And if you can do that, if you're Texas where, like, the money is no thing, it doesn't matter. You just get them in and roll them in there and have them be an extra voice on staff. Like, that is perfect. That is a perfect scenario for Texas. And you combine that with the fact that Texas just today found out that they got a high-profile transfer wide receiver from Wyoming. Like, they're really building that offense out, man. I mean, they're going to be, if the quarterback situation turns out anything like what the Quinn Ewers hype actually is, Texas should have a lot of bullets in the chamber, man. But I know we say that every single year. We say that every single year, so I will not fall fully into the trap. But you can see how things like that are developing. And the reason that I say it's just so lame with Gary Patterson is, like, I get it. You're upset with TCU. I'm sure he still wants to coach. I'm sure he's looking for the best opportunity for himself. And very good chance special assistant to the head coach at the University of Texas would be the best available opportunity there, certainly in terms of prestige in the program that you're working at. But, like, Gary knows exactly how hated Texas is. That was such a huge thing at TCU. They beat the crap out of Texas on a regular basis. Like, there was clearly an emphasis on that. He knows how the rest of the league feels about Texas. It sucks to see somebody that you respect and that you think has a lot to offer just go join up with the bad guys. Like, things don't work out, and so you just go join up with the villain and help them out. I just feel like Gary, you could have held up for something different, like done something a little bit different. And I'm sure he's got a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of it. I'm sure based on convenience, money, what he wants to do career-wise, that it probably does make the most sense. It just sucks for everybody else in the league. It really does. Really does. So I hate to see it. I do. Gary Patterson is not flawless, but I do like a lot about Gary Patterson, and I do not like seeing him in that Texas logo. Did not like seeing that Texas logo right there on the chest for good old G-Pat at the game. CG Shields, appreciate another donation from CG. West Virginia fan in the chat here tonight. He says, I'm a West Virginia fan and alum, and you're right. The ACC does not want West Virginia, and the Big 12 are in it together for the long haul. West Virginia and the Big 12 are in it together in the long haul, and we all need to accept it. Yeah, I think, like, if I were a West Virginia fan, one, I appreciate, CG, that you are, like, in that spot. I think regardless of, like, what you really think or hope or want or whatever, like, that is how I would operate if I were a West Virginia fan. Be saying, like, look, I'm in it for the long haul with the Big 12. If the ACC ever does come around, that would be great. That would be excellent. I don't owe the Big 12 anything. I don't think West Virginia owes the Big 12 anything either, by the way. If they were to leave tomorrow and the ACC actually invited them, hey, I get it. That makes a lot more sense. It's a better option for you. I think that would be the best, the healthiest way to approach it if you are a West Virginia fan. Like, hey, man, that'd be great if we get this. For right now, this is what we got. Let's make the best of it. And so, yeah, I think I think you're in a good spot with it, and I think that's where I would try to be if I were a West Virginia fan. Bud, okay, now here's an interesting one, Bud. This is a great comment here. Bud talking about Gary Patterson being at Texas. Bud says, how do you think Sark feels about the next head coach nipping at his heels? Now that is very, very, very interesting And I know that like TCU fans right away would be like, okay, great, like hire him. That perfect. Because things had clearly, I mean, Gary Patterson, I guess long story short, but I would say I don't think Gary Patterson is ever going to be the head coach at Texas. I think if it were 5 to 10 years ago, that would definitely be something. If I were Sark, I'd be like, oh boy, like maybe this guy does wind up taking my job. I think Gary, unless and maybe he goes through some sort of major change here, he seemed like a guy that had kind of just outgrown where kids are today. Like just didn't seem to be totally syncing up with like the attitude that you need to have in the transfer portal era and the NIL era, with so many things that have changed so drastically, so quickly in the game of college football. It felt to me like Gary had fallen behind there. And when you are at his age, which is not like crazy old, but let's look it up. Gary Patterson wiki. He just generally at that point, he was born in 1960, 61. So he's 61. I mean, that's not like super, super old as a coach necessarily, but it's also not an age where you typically see a ton of evolution. And it just felt to me like he was kind of slipping behind that. So I have a hard time seeing that coming around enough to where like Texas would entrust him to be the head coach. But like I said, he does have all those things that like Texas has never really wanted to go after in a head coach. Like he may not be the sexiest guy in the world, but gritty, tough, coaches defense, typically had a very good culture at TCU. All things Texas has missed wildly. So I definitely get the thought. I think Sark probably feels confident enough, and two, desperate enough. Like we need to go get all the resources that we can. It seems like Texas has really put the full court press on Gary Patterson here in this situation. If you look at it from Sark's perspective, hey, this TCU program has killed us over the last decade. This guy clearly knows what he's doing in our conference, in our state. I need this guy on board, and that's a risk that I'm willing to take. By the way, there were people wanting to fire Sark after year one. So, like, no matter what he does, no matter who he brings in, there's always going to be the risk that you get fired at Texas. That's the job. That's a part of being at Texas. So I think that's another thing that probably neutralizes that risk a little bit, like mitigates some of that, is like, if he sucks, if he fails this year, again, like he's probably just going to be run out of town anyway, no matter who's there waiting in the wings. But that's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. I appreciate you bringing that up. Will, is there any chance the Big 12 adds Utah State? It's now a good football program, long history in basketball, and rival for BYU, in the middle of nowhere and long terrible at football. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as laughable as like some people might, just to hear a Utah State, and shrug it off. That is a pretty solid football program, certainly over like the last decade, and basketball too. Like that's been a pretty solid basketball program. But I don't know. I don't look much at like the academic profile, everything else it would bring. It's not going to bring you a lot of prestige. It's not a program. Well, they have been solid. It's not a program that's at like Boise State kind of level. I think like if you're going to be Utah State and like the rest of the package that they have to offer, you have to get your football program to like a Boise level to really merit and warrant consideration here. So yeah, and for BYU, I'm sure it would be great. I'm sure that would be a fun rivalry. Obviously, they are close together. There are some things that would work out there, but for the actual legitimate viability of the conference, having to split the pie another way with the Utah State, there's just way more in it for Utah State to gain right now than there would be for the Big 12. If 10 years from now their football program is Boise State, like they go through a decade-long run like that, then maybe we can talk. But I appreciate you hanging out, Will. I appreciate the donation. I appreciate the comment there. All right. We're at about an hour here. I am probably going to dip out. Let me just get into the last thing here, because it branches off what we just talked about with Texas. And so, by the way, if you have something left for me here, you got about 5 minutes to get it in. Donate by clicking the $ below the chat box there and get your question or comment up to the top of the chat. Texas Tech fans, you guys are really having a lot of fun with Chris Beard and these losses that he is absorbing, which, of course, it was like doubly fun for me. Make fun of Texas. K-State was the team that beat Texas on Tuesday. Tech is doing well after Beard left them high and dry. Can't wait for the two games that Tech and Texas are going to play against each other this year. That should be wonderful theater. But Chris Beard is, I think, a good coach. Like Texas Tech fans, I fully understand the narrative and the story. Mark Adams was really the backbone of it. Tubby Smith, even. I've seen that throw. Like Tubby Smith was really a lot of the backbone of it. And Beard, when he didn't get Mark Adams, he leaves, and all of a sudden things aren't going that well, even though he has all this talent in Austin. I certainly understand how that narrative gets spun. And do I think Chris Beard was probably overrated a little bit, and Mark Adams had a ton to do with it? I mean, clearly, yes. Yes, but I also still think Chris Beard is a very good coach, and I think this may just be more about Texas. Like, it really may be more about Texas bringing down coaches in general. And notwithstanding, Mark Adams obviously is still a phenomenal coach, and it's a really cool story that he, again, at about Gary Patterson's age, finally gets this shot and now is just killing it. But Texas, I think, just has this cultural problem within the university and the athletic department and all of this that is getting worse. And I think it prevents them from being as good as they can be. And I think it runs down coaches like Shaka Smart and Tom Herman, who were, and let's look at that, the last iteration of Texas coaches, like just cut from the same cloth in terms of being super highly sought after, as good a get as you could have possibly wanted at the time those hires really were made, and they don't work out. They fizzle out. There are things that have changed since 10 to 15 years ago when you had not only Mac Brown, but Rick Barnes having a ton of success at Texas. And that is that, one, the Longhorn Network exists, and I've long been a proponent of the thought that, like, having to take on all these extra responsibilities, do these extra shows, deal with extra, like, just media obligations because of the Longhorn Network is something that hurts. Like, as a coach, you don't want to spend your time doing that. You don't want to spend your time worrying about that. The other thing that's happened is, look at what's happened with the city of Austin. Like, the city of Austin has turned into this hub for people to go to from the coast. Like, Austin has totally blown up, and now it's a place that everybody wants to go. What is the point in that relating to this? Distraction. So there are more distractions for the coach to have to deal with from a standpoint of, like, media and Longhorn Network, in addition to what's always been a place oversaturated with too many cooks in the kitchen, too many boosters that think they have a say, and too many people that you have to try and keep happy at Texas. And now the kids that you're bringing in are in, like, one of the most sought after places to be for, like, millennials, Gen Z, and younger, like, young kids want to be in Austin. The population has grown by 34% since 2010. And I even look back, the population since Mac Brown took over has basically doubled in Austin. So Mac Brown took over in 1998, and the population in Austin has almost doubled since then. Over 1 million more people live in Austin than did back then. That all makes it more tough as a coach. Like, it is an advantage in terms of luring in talent, because you can say, hey, come to this place. This will be awesome. You can go hang out and do all these things. But then, yeah, at the same time, it's awesome. You can do all these other things besides being in the film room, besides worrying about football. And I just think there's so much of that at play at Texas right now that I think they make coaches worse. I think it brings down good coaches. And I think that is, like, a problem that Texas is going to be dealing with for a long time. At Wolf 58, I think you hit the nail on the head. Texas's problems extend beyond campus. They include alumni and boosters as well. The curse of too much money. That's exactly it. It really is. It's like a curse of too much money and resources, and getting lulled into thinking like that will solve your problems and that's how you can do it. I think you see all of that. I think it makes these coaches worse. So I'm here for it. Tech fans, dunk all over Chris Beard. That guy left you. You have every right to play the most jilted of lovers, and now you're getting the best revenge, which is living well. That's what they always tell you, right? The best revenge is living well. You're doing that. You should go after Chris Beard full throat, man. Do it to it. But I also think, looking at it from a bigger picture, like, Texas just has problems that they may never escape, because, like, I don't know, toothpaste isn't going back in the tube on Austin. That's going to continue to be there. Are you ever going to be able to shut the boosters out? Like, the rich problems, first world problems, rich people problems going on in Austin, but they are definitely problems. All right. Feels like it's been kind of a marathon show here tonight, but really fun. Lots of interaction. Very lively. Appreciate all of you guys. Again, I'm scheduled to interview Stuart Mandel tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that. So look for that content on the channel here pretty soon. It should be very interesting, and we'll see if there is much of a change in the way he views the viability of the Big 12 now based on what happened this past year. I will be tough but fair. This is not going to be anything crazy. No gotcha interview, but I think it should be fun. All right. Take care, guys. Have a good night. Thank you to everybody who donated. Thank you to those of you who just hung out in the chat all night. It's been awesome, and I will talk to you guys soon.